All right, y'all. Today in Kat's History Corner, we're going to be joined, as we always are, by the wonderful Gabe.
Hi.
But she's going to say stuff, too.
Yes.
That's, like, going to make you super sad, but also educate you on some stuff if you didn't already know. Because that's kind of our whole thing.
Yeah, did you know America sucks?
Yeah. People suck.
Yeah.
Like, we're parasites. Well, maybe we should stop having children and then just disappear. Who knows? I don't know. I've argued this point before, but I don't think we should do it.
To this.
I don't think we should do it through force.
Yeah, a decision.
I think it should be a collective, just like, yeah, we all suck. Let's just... Everybody says yes.
Else a chance.
Raise your hand if you want to be done now. Everyone opts in, and it's fantastic.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Today we're talking population control. Super not fun and sad topic. But I guess to start out, a question we kind of come to when we're talking about this stuff is this something we need to be worried about? And what I'll argue is from a government choosing what we do with our bodies and, like, manipulating us and taking away our fundamental human rights? Yes.
Yeah.
100%. We should be worried because it's happening. It's been happening. It's probably going to continue to happen. We've been making some positive reforms, but also backslides as we, as a society, tend to do. But then if you're asking from, like, is overpopulation going to be the end of society?
Like, should we allow them to do that?
Yeah. Is it going to make us have famine and all this other stuff, not enough food for people? Not really. I honestly, like, I didn't think we should be forcing this stuff, but I did think overpopulation was going to be more of a problem than it actually looks like it's going to be based on the data.
Yeah.
And thank God for data and facts and internet.
Yeah.
Because I learned, and I feel significantly less worried about that and way more worried about the government, which is something I already was worried about, but, like, extra now.
Yeah.
Just add to the fear.
Yeah.
As 2 years, 3 years almost, we're on our way to 3 years. Right?
What, as a podcast?
As a podcast.
Oh, yes.
We've been growing these lists of fears.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
Just keep them going. So yeah, a little less worried about that. But as we will talk about, it's pretty dark otherwise. So Gabe shared this cool video with me called Overpopulation, the Human Explosion Explained from YouTuber Kurzingtacht. I said it wrong. I tried. I practiced it a lot today, but here we are. It's later. It's in a nutshell, which, fun fact, means in a nutshell in Germany. Like German.
Nice.
So it makes sense that that's the title. So the video explains the development of human societies across our planet, kind of anthropology times, and explains that populations across all, like, Homo sapien societies develop similarly when entering, like, this modernization period. So what post-industrial revolution kind of how does society grow? How does population grow and increase or decrease? So before, we reached a now time, before the Industrial Revolution, we kind of had equal deaths to the amount of births. So, like, we didn't grow really, especially if there was, like, a plague or famine or anything like that, because, like, the weather and stuff impacted us so much more because technologically we were not as advanced. We didn't have modern medicine. We didn't have a lot of medicines in general. We had a lot of risk factors of ways that we would die. People were having significantly more babies because most babies would die, and only you'd have, like, 5 to 7 kids, and 2 of them would reach adulthood.
Yeah.
So you were having significantly more kids, but, like,
to even the odds.
Infant mortality was very high, and that's why fertility rates were high, and it didn't increase the population. So what we're going to be talking about is demographic transition. It's a process of how population evolves, and it has 4 stages. Thankful to populationeducation.org. They got this, like, cool just list of what it is. I can just tell you. It makes it so much easier. I don't have to, like, overcomplicate it. It's just, here's what it is. Cool.
Nice.
The video talks about it too, but this, like, just tells you what's going on. So stage 1, it can be applied to most places in the world before the Industrial Revolution, where, as I said, both birth and death rates are high, and the population just kind of skates.
Yeah.
Or if something bad happens, falls. Stage 2, the introduction of modern medicine lowers death rates, especially among children, while birth rates remain high. So it's like, we have not realized that we are sustaining life as much because you don't know that generation to generation. So we're still having a lot of babies. We have 5 kids. We expected 3 of them to die. They didn't die. Now we have 5 kids and don't know what to do. then we start to notice the impact of that because we're like, wow, 5 kids is a lot to maintain financially.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe have less kids next time.
Send them to the mines.
Oh, God.
I'm kidding.
But many of least developed countries today are in stage 2. So still, the quality of life is still improved from pre-industrial revolution times, but is essentially we haven't really hit the stride of understanding that we are surviving longer. Stage 3, birth rates gradually decrease, usually as a result of improved economic conditions, so quality of life, and an increase in women's status so that
they can work.
Women's rights,
Yep.
Emancipation, basically access to contraception, having to support financially the household as well. So population growth continues as it will, but at a lower rate because generally you have 2 kids, 1 or 2 kids at most, and that's like the situation. Most developing countries are at stage 3. Stage 4, birth and death rates are both low, stabilizing the population. So we kind of plateau. We were going, woo! Now we're like, ugh.
We just keep the same humans for a while.
Yes.
No new ones, just same people.
We're not going crazy. We're evening it out. We're evening the playing field. And with higher levels of education, stronger economy, better health care, a higher proportion of working women, and a fertility rate hovering around 2 children per woman. Most developed countries are at stage 4. And there's a proposed stage 5 that is on the table, which would include countries where fertility rates have fallen significantly below replacement levels, so they've decreased significantly. So, for example, Japan, a lot of the young people are not having babies because they're working so much, and like that's just not their priority. And there are an exponential amount of older people, like elderly people, and not enough young people to support that population.
Or China, in the fact that they have more men than women, and so no one's around to take care of the old people.
Yeah.
And have babies.
Yep. So it cuts the population in half essentially because there's not enough people to do the babies.
Yeah.
Essentially.
But you can take a page out of Canada's book and let people in. Let the immigrants in, and they'll make babies.
Yeah, everyone just babies now.
Let's bring them.
Babies, no babies. We don't know what we want. We don't know what we want. So here we are. Okay. So this information, if we trust and assume the accuracy, which I'll say I do, shows that we will plateau globally. We will not overpopulate to the point where we cannot sustain what's happening based on like this data. And then also the whole idea, especially with the in a nutshell video goes through, is that like helping other countries is a positive thing because that helps them develop quicker into this like modern world. Yeah. And what I will say, consent is important.
Yes.
America, England, Western society. Consent is important.
And helping.
If people do not want to be modernized, you should not do so by force. But history.
Have you met?
Have
you met mankind?
Yeah. So basically, if we help each other, if someone on the other side of the globe is doing better, that is better for us on this side of the globe. Because ultimately, carbon emissions go down, impact on the environment goes down because we're not overpopulating so much that we cannot maintain that population.
And we can help with trade and with making food and making industry.
More people means more people to help with pushing Homo sapiens as a human race further. Yeah. The problems we have, though, however, are often cultural divides, religious divides. There's lots of other factors in there that are not based in just the bare existence of humans that everyone likes to cling to, that divides us further and makes us like not help each other or murder each other or force ideals down each other's throats. Or what we'll talk about is sterilize humans without permission. Yep. Or just murder a lot. I don't really... Yeah. And in the U.S., I mean, we have we're going to talk a lot about sterilization, but also like commandeering like the choice of what women can do with their bodies. Trying to honestly force babies in a lot of instances too by limiting the amounts of safe abortions and contraceptive based on religious grounds or like this concept of objective morality that is not universal. Morality is not a universal. There are no universals.
Yeah, we said that. Yeah.
we have other things that influence this that muddies the waters and makes things kind of confusing. An example of this we'll talk about, especially in our film section, but a little intro to that is the one-child policy that was existing in China is no longer.
Now it's 2.
Now you're allowed to have 2 if you are financially stable and can complete the application to a certain standard. La da da. A lot of people actually aren't having more than 2 kids though, because the housing cost is so high that it's not encouraging to have more than one baby, which is a whole thing, because if housing is too expensive, then you're not going to have people who want to have kids in that environment. Millennials.
Yeah.
That's us.
You got baby money?
We don't have baby money. They took all our money because they said college would get us jobs, and it didn't. And now they're like, oh, why? How strange. They just want dogs and cats, not people. And it's like,
why don't they go
pay for
and
stuff.
eat at Olive Garden?
It's ridiculous. I can't. So yeah, in China, we've witnessed this through the one-child policy. Now, in explaining this policy, there's a lot of reasons this happened. And I'm going to give a little backstory before we talk about it in the film section. And I won't get too deep into like what the one-child policy is until we get to the film section. But this is kind of like why and how we got there. So it kind of came into play in the founding of the People's Republic of China, which was the announcement of the end of a costly, full-scale civil war between the Chinese Communist Party and the Nationalist Party within China in 1949. So there was a big civil war following World War II that kind of had China up in ends, like big situation. Lots of people died, lots of people suffer through this time, and then they came out of it with the Communist Party winning. So in 1950, China was transitioning kind of from the first to the second stage, maybe honestly into the third stage of the demographic transition, in that they were modernizing and trying to do so extremely quickly. So they were kind of shaken by how quickly their population had grown after the close of the war, and they were trying to like manage this, and while also rapidly modernizing and to keep up with demand. So they were trying to kind of follow the Soviet Russia in their communist ideals and how to increase production, but they didn't want to do so with big technology and like machines. They wanted to do so in like an economically sound way to make it cheaper and more productive. But the problem is that Russia has a lot of agricultural basing to that. They had enough food to feed their people during this time of transition where China did not. It was a very densely populated area, and because of that, it was very like dependent upon like good weather and not natural disasters and like things just going well for there to be enough food for the population that exists. And especially if it's rapidly growing, they're trying to address this issue because they don't know how to fix it. And right before this kind of happened, they were pushing like contraceptive. They're trying to get like, they were kind of doing what we kind of did during that time, whereas women were starting to have autonomy and could get like reproductive health and rights and stuff like that. But then once the Civil War unleashed, it kind of did a backslide. So during Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward, which took place in 1958, it was essentially forcing anyone who had not assimilated to communist culture to live in communes. So wherever you lived before, that didn't really so much matter. They put you into like sections, and that was your commune, and you were given jobs, and you had to like work for that commune and make your society thrive. So this event, combined with a handful of natural disasters, triggered the Great Famine in 1958 until 1962. It's estimated by census demographers that during the famine, 20 to 30 million people died during this time from famine. But there's an article by Frank Dicketer, who wrote an article in the New York Times as well as a book titled Malice Great Famine. He states in his article that the number, according to his research, was far worse because he went through like diary entries and like things
because not everyone was in the census, I'm sure. It's very important that you submit your census.
Yes, it's soon. People do it. So he stated it was far worse, and states that in all the records I studied, it suggests that the Great Leap Forward was responsible for at least 45 million deaths.
That's awful.
He goes on to note that between 2 and 3 million of those victims were tortured to death or similarly executed for infractions such as not working efficiently enough within their communes, stealing food during a period of famine, among other things. So like any kind of like petty crimes or like rising up against the new regime was seen as like a punishable offense. And I read some really awful things in that article. Like a man had to bury his son alive and then died of like heartache 3 weeks later. So I mean, I did not collect those sources. I don't know if that's 100% accurate, but if you're interested, it's in the New York Times. He did write that book.
Yeah.
I wrote a paper about it, ironically, in 9th grade, so I had a lot of this information just in my brain. Because history major was a fun time. It wasn't, but still, learn stuff. But basically, the whole idea was to, like, improve the collective life of the Chinese people. It's like the whole communism is the collective. You're not an individual, you are of a collection.
Yeah.
You're trying to improve society as a whole. But what we ended up seeing was just a significant amount of what I'd argue is creative destruction and destroying the old in with the new, and the new was
not fully thought out.
Yeah, and they never fully kind of claimed all the victims, like the responsibility. Yeah. Essentially. And then, we see later that because of this, a lot of people accepted the one-child policy because they saw all this death from famine, that there were so many people, 45 million people, who died because there was not enough food. And, I mean, the cause for that
was all those things. But if they're in that commune, they don't know that.
Yeah.
They're just given the information they're given. If they're told it's because there's too many people, then it's very easy to believe. Yeah. And it's like they were just having a really bad luck year, natural disasters and what have you. But the combination of all of it was just a really bad time, and a lot of people died. But for anyone who's like, oh, boo, China, bad China, China's bad. Shh. Sounds like America right now.
Absolutely not. Because the following, we are so equally guilty of population control, manipulating and controlling women in our country, and forcibly sterilizing women here, forcing people to not have abortion, like both ways. We're doing it both ways. It's a whole terrible time. What are rights? I don't know. So I got a lot of this information from ourbodiesourselves.org. Gabe, I believe you also got some of yours from it, but...
Nope.
No, just kidding. Well, just kidding.
Yeah.
Separate sources, but similar information. So I'm going to talk about just an intro, and then Gabe's going to cover specifically Puerto Rico. So as early as 1907, the United States had instituted a public policy that gave the government the right to sterilize unwilling and unwitting people. So some states, notably including North Carolina, set up eugenics boards. Sounds great.
Yep, in 1907.
In the early 20th century, these boards reviewed petitions from government and private agencies to impose sterilization on poor, unwed, and or mentally disabled women, children, and men. So North Carolina alone sterilized over 7,600 individuals between 1930 and 1970. In North Carolina, a state noted for its discriminatory sterilization practices in the 20th century, 65% of sterilization procedures were performed on Black women, even though only 25% of the state's female population was Black. There are also hundreds of thousands of cases where the government threatened women with losing federal benefits if they did not undergo sterilization. And to just throw more salt on the wound, as many as 25% of Native American women between the ages of 15 and 44 years old were sterilized by the 1970s without consent. Oftentimes they'd go in for other medical procedures and they would sterilize them during those medical procedures.
Yeah, because they didn't have to ask. Actually. And it's even further exacerbated if you have people who do not speak English. And so you use that as an excuse. So let's dive into that. So I'm going to start off my section with a really sad, depressing, and incredibly angering statement.
Yes.
Between the 1930s and the 1970s, approximately 1/3 of the female population of Puerto Rico was sterilized, making it the highest rate of sterilization in the world. in the world.
Yeah.
The U.S. did this, and no one talked about it. It
they
is not brought up.
Things to Puerto Rico all the time.
Yeah, still suffering. Just a lot of people still do not have power. Essentially, the government, the U.S. government, was afraid of overpopulation in Puerto Rico. Due to it being a poor country as well, they were able to get away with a lot more. Also, because of the eugenics boards, it was also seen that they were unfit or like not the prime example of who should be having children. Like, these are poor people of color, and so they were using this to doing that. So they were hoping, similarly to China, to create a more modern and economically stable country. And so they thought, well, we'll just, stabilize Puerto Rico first. So they instituted an intense sterilization program, and when a new, not yet tested contraception pill with 10 times the amount of hormones needed was like starting to like go through trials, and this is like quotation trials, Puerto Rican women jumped on it and had no idea that they were the first people to even try it.
Yeah.
They had no idea. And this was because, the 10 times the amount of hormones can lead to heart failure, and 3 women even died, but it was never investigated, because why? So these women took this pill because they were trying to avoid being sterilized so that they continued to work, and because they had no idea that there were side effects.
Yeah.
And so, according to Sex Explained, which is a great show on Netflix, they have an episode on birth control, and there's a part where they talk about the women in Puerto Rico in this documentary that covers this experiment, essentially. So a lot of them didn't even know that they were being used in the experiment until the documentary filmmaker showed up and was like, let me interview you about what's happening to you. And they were like, did you know that you were guinea pigs? And they were like, no. Like, they couldn't speak English, and so they didn't even know. So a program that was endorsed by the U.S. government began sending health department officials to rural parts of the island advocating for sterilization. And by 1946, postpartum sterilizations happened frequently. So essentially, women would go in, have a child, and be sterilized immediately after that and have no idea, because it was all at the same time.
Yeah.
It was like, you had your one, you're out. It was horrific. So a lot of them didn't know that that was happening. Some of them were tricked into believing that it was a reversible decision, because they were using euphemisms like getting your tubes tied, which is not correct. That's not what sterilization is. So they had no idea, or they were really young. Some of these women were under 20 who were told like to do it, had no idea, were getting told false information, and so would do it, and then later regret it. So it's so it was a decision, but not really, because no one had all of the information. So similar to how we talked last week with Romania, right? They had the problem of women going into the workforce, so there was less children. America wanted Puerto Rico to have that problem. Essentially, they wanted more women to work and them to be making less children. So they figured to kind of help with their workforce, they would give women less reasons to be having to stay home.
Okay.
And the way to do that would be to sterilize them, because now they can't have any children, right? So it's essentially that the prevailing wisdom was that the denial of motherhood was a more effective means of incorporating women into the workforce than being able to afford children. One of the reasons why these women were influenced to do it. Well, one is because they didn't get all the details, right? They didn't speak English, so they didn't get all the details. But also, it was told to them that it was the best form of birth control, right? Because it was quick, it was accessible, you only needed it one time, and it was free. Because they started just sending them out there for free, and they were like, we'll just sterilize you, and then it's done. And then you don't have to worry about that anymore. And you can go and work and make something for yourself. Quotes,
oh my gosh.
Right? So it was like, and it's hard also to argue when the alternatives at the time were these really toxic and untested alternatives with birth control. So like, as you can see in the Sex Explained documentary short, that they talk about all the ways that like pre-birth control and contraceptives were really toxic and would sometimes lead to, hysterectomies or other things, because they weren't proper, like in any way, that dangerous. Women needed it, right? And if you think the assault to Latinx women ends in Puerto Rico, you'd be surprised or not surprised if you're a listener of ours.
I don't think I was surprised.
In California, the Mexican-American women were forcibly sterilized after giving birth as well. So in similar circumstances, went in to have a child, came out not able to have any more. So the film No Mas Bebés tells the story of these events taking place in Los Angeles during the 1960s and 1970s. So, this is taken from an article from the University of Pittsburgh called The Dark History of Forced Sterilization of Latina Women. And it says that the case of Madrigal versus Cooligan was a federal class action lawsuit in which these women fought back after being sterilized without informed consent or under duress. Dolores Madrigal, one of the 10 plaintiffs in the case, was told her sterilization could be easily reversed. Evina Hernandez, who did not find out that she had been sterilized until years after her son was born, also was told this. At the end of the trial in 1978, the judge ruled that neither of the charges were true, citing misunderstandings due to the fact that the women primarily spoke Spanish. The judge blamed their distress for the procedure on cultural background that made these women believe that their worth was in their ability to have children. So it was like, it's your problem that you have a problem with the fact that we sterilized you without your knowing. Because of your culture,
Jesus Christ.
Is what that judge said. Another cause of the decision was that voluntary...
I don't know why I made that face. I shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Another cause of the decision was that voluntary informed consent was not a legal requirement until 1974, and after that's after the case had been decided. At the time of the procedures, there was no serious legal objections to asking women to consent to an irreversible procedure while she was in the middle of labor. There's just a little thing in there. Thanks to University of Pittsburgh, who wrote that, but also Stanford University had an article titled Forced Sterilization in Puerto Rico, who had amazing details about it and really covered the whole thing. But I did not want to gloss over the fact that the sterilization of these Latina women was brought by a superintendent of the U.S. Eugenics Board, or Record Office. His name was Harry Laughlin, and Laughlin used a model eugenical sterilization law to implement the mandatory sterilization of the socially inadequate in 30 U.S. states and Puerto Rico. So this was during that time when they decided certain people, and it just so happens some of them were vulnerable populations of people who were, neurodivergent or differently abled, but also a lot of colored people or people who were from different cultures that weren't deemed the American standard. So
gross.
There's your fun history corner from Gabe and Kat.
Trash.
Yeah.